Chris O'Connor here. Join our fabulous curmudgeonly community on Facebook at facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist dedicated to this episode. Now, let's get started.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. If you were seriously and passionately into music in the mid to late noughties, or the aughts, whatever you want to call the first decade of the 21st century, there was no way you could escape the music media hype that surrounded the Canadian band Arcade Fire. In addition, for a band that never really had any hit singles throughout their career, they were massively successful on a commercial level, with all their albums following their debut album charting highly in the top 10 in many countries around the world. Their selling point, especially during their mid to late noughties heyday, was that they took heartfelt indie rock and blew it up to arena rock proportions. Basically, they were hailed by critics and fans as a U2 or an REM for the millennial generation. Well, count yours truly, Curmudgeons, as a pair of music geeks who were not impressed at all, not then and not now. First of all, Arcade Fire never had the sonic innovation nor the compelling songwriting of peak period U2 or REM. At their very best, which wasn't often, they always came across as derivative indie rock imposters, appealing only to those who weren't familiar with much rock music before 1990. Second, the supposed heartfelt quality of their music was rendered with such puerile, overly theatrical, overly sentimental histrionics and an overbearing self-importance that made U2 seem humble by comparison. Third, perhaps most annoying of all, you have the issue of their fans. If you remember, or if you were quote-unquote there during the noughties and even the early 2010s, you know what I'm talking about. Obnoxious, oh-so-fashionably tattooed, ironically bearded if they were guys, craft beer drinking indie hipster douchebags with even more obnoxious and appalling tastes in music. Chris and I lived in New York in the early noughties, and we saw this development coming. Suddenly, these lame-ass tools had a soundtrack all their own, and what an insufferable soundtrack it was, and still is. While they still have their hardcore fans, fortunately in the last 10 years or so, their star has started to wane, and they aren't as popular as they used to be, especially with albums that haven't received the critical praise that they were accustomed to. It seems that lots of people have come around to the truth. This band was never that good, and even worse, for them, their annoying hipster posturing has rendered them terminally uncool. Now seems as good a time as any to take a gigantic, curmudgeonly crap on their vastly overrated discography. This is the fourth installment in what we bluntly call our quote-unquote shit series, where we break down the catalogs of bands/artists we really don't like and have fun, well, shitting all over them. In previous episodes, we verbally beat down the music of The Killers and My Chemical Romance. To us, Arcade Fire represent the third of the three-headed beast of god-awful early 2000s rock, and they're due for a critical tongue-lashing. Welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report as we make the case as to why Arcade Fire are shit.
Well, Arturo, are you ready to hop in the spaceship and go to the other side of the space-time continuum with me, baby?
Yeah, as long as the music is good on this side, because the music hasn't been good on our side for a while.
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. And yes, folks, we are about to venture into our parallel universe. You hear that music? That means that we're going to where rock and roll is still predominant, is still on the billboards, is still selling out arenas, is still the music that makes sense. Where guys with long hair and scuzzy beards and jean jackets are on the cover of Rolling Stone, baby. That's where we're at. And the long way of saying that this is the segment, the Parallel Universe is the segment where we cover new and newish records by artists of recent vintage that we think that you should be as excited about as we are. And, we basically recommend these albums and it'll keep you current, baby. That's what we're here for. We're keeping you current. In that spirit, Arturo, who are you covering on this episode here in the Parallel Universe?
Yes, hailing from Cambridge, England, in a parallel universe version of our Earth where rock music is still a significant part of the pop cultural zeitgeist, the Baby Seals, with their debut album Chaos, would be the breakout punk band of the year. They're an all-female trio consisting of singer-guitarist Carrie Devine, her sister Amy Devine on drums, and Kate Shore on bass. Now, how would I describe their sound? It is righteous feminist punk rock with a mean streak of grunge, a demented sense of humor bordering on non-PC, and most importantly of all, impossibly catchy songs with insane hooks. Standout tracks, the album opener, Yawn Porn, comes running out of the gate with a hilarious condemnation of the boring and predictable nature of modern pornography.
Yep.
Remember when I mentioned that mean grunge streak? Invisible Woman is where it's most apparent. One of the best chorus guitar riffs of any rock music this year. Vibrator rocks with reckless abandon and is defiant in its glorification of using, you can guess what it is. And of course, there's the raucous, joyous Nipple Hair, which pushes back against society's seeming obsession with full body shaving. It is a thrilling, funny, clever album of terrific feminist punk rock energy, an easy 4 out of 5 stars and highly recommended. Chris?
You forgot to mention the best album title or song title on the album. My labia is lopsided, but I don't mind.
Yeah, it's a good song too.
Yeah, they're pretty frank. I would say they're the female chats.
Yeah,
where they have a shtick, but there's more to them than the shtick. There's a palpable feminist rage. Invisible Woman is anthemic. I think that songs like Mild Misogynist, which are pretty satirical. Those are just really, really strong stuff. So they remind me in that vein of a young band like the Chats. They're kind of, which I know is one of your favorite young bands of recent vintage from Australia there. And and then of course my favorite lyric on the entire record is from Nipple Hair, which there's a speak sing in the middle on the bridge where they say 50% of the planet has nipples, so be fucking grateful. Yeah,
I think 50% of the planet has breasts, is what it says.
Oh, okay. It's not
50%
nipples.
50% of the planet has breasts, so be grateful.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Be fucking grateful. Yep. That's some really, really good stuff. So yeah, good pick. This is the best, or this is the most fun album I've heard in months. There's been some pretty good albums this year, but not a lot of fun ones. This is fun. I mean, it's not Cowboy Carter, but I would say it's bordering near the top of my list as far as albums that I've heard from this year that I've liked. As narrow a list as that may be. Speaking of which, here in the Parallel Universe, we have something that we call the Parallel Vault. Old timers, long timers that have been with us, remember we used to do a segment called the Vault where we would go review vintage records, kind of like what we're doing now with new records. Well, these days we reserve the right to go into what we call our Parallel Vault, which means albums by newish artists, meaning anything that's come out in the last decade. That's our parameter. Well, that vault is a comfort at times like here in the month of May of 2024, when your boy Chris struggles to find any new music he likes. Unfortunately, that seems to happen to me at least once a year now. So here I am then longing for great stuff of recent vintage. Kurt Vile to the rescue. My
Yes.
favorite album of the past 10 years is Kurt Vile's Bottle It In from 2018. And that's what I'm talking about here now. Arturo and I have talked a lot about Kurt Vile on the Curmudgeon Rock Report over the years in various contexts. We did an episode years ago called The Lost Rockstar Generation. We've made references to how Vile started his career with another band we like, The War on Drugs, which is making noise now. To me, Kurt Vile is perhaps the most singular rock and roll artist of his generation. That can be argued, but I would say that he's the most singular. When people ask me what Vile sounds like, I half jokingly say that he sounds like Kurt Vile, the Philly boy with songwriting and guitar chops that must be heard to be believed.
See, for me, I would describe him as if Lou Reed and Tom Petty had a bastard child that smoked pot with pavement.
That's pretty
That's how I
good.
would describe Kurt Vile's sound.
That's pretty close to a line that I have here in talking about Vile and Bottle and In. So may we continue. His rhythms are wholly his own. The croaking yet somehow emotionally evocative tone of his singing voice is wholly his own. His ability to stretch a song out to 10 minutes and somehow make that length both make sense and feel as tight as a 3-minute Beatles ditty is a genuine gift. Vile is not self-indulgent in the least. He serves his song with exactly what they need, which is a certain laconic folksiness that features clever turns of lyrical phrases and lead guitar lines that turn slowly, obsessively hypnotic the more they repeat as a song progresses. Now, if we were to make a compare, kind of like what Artie just said, think about Tom Petty at his radio friendliest, mixed with Lou Reed at his most radio unfriendly. Artsy popsy, folksy whimsy, boppity hoppity boo. Now, I'm being silly there, but Vile at his best really does defy labels. And so it is on Bottle It In, a marvelous achievement spun over the course of 13 songs and 78 strangely compact minutes. Here are the opening lyrics to the album from the song Loading Zones. Back is aching, but I cannot sleep, 'cause I want to be like I am the mayor of some godforsaken town. Sure, they knighted me yesterday, but who needs armor when I have an exoskeleton? That's an oddly poignant way for Kurt to tell us he's tired.
Yeah.
But those words draw me in immediately. The song itself is a majestic rock and roll romp. The album has several compelling axes on which it turns towards greatness. Let's talk about two of those. There's the back-to-back thumpers, Bass Ackwards, and One Trick Ponies. The former rumbles for nearly 9 minutes and finds Vile at his most contemplatively wise ass. The latter maintains the absorbing mid-tempo beat of its predecessor, but turns the volume up and rocks balls like tomorrow is optional as backup singers accompany Vile on his frustrated chorus. By the end of One Trick Ponies, my mouth is slightly more agape and I'm completely riveted. The next key axis actually comes in the form of the next song, the wonderful pop tune Rollin' with the Flow. To steal a line that Arturo has used in private conversations, if that song had been released in 1990, it would have been a huge hit.
Yeah.
At least as big as Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down was. It's there that Vile basically tells us that he's no mere eccentric slacker king. He possesses the talent to write entire albums of hyper melodic hit songs like that one if he wanted to. If you thought he wasn't doing everything on purpose before then, he leaves no doubt he's the real deal with Rolling with the Flow. So, if you're just like me and you're not really feeling the new Paul Weller album or the new Buffalo Tom album, then
Who
bottle
cares about them?
yeah, exactly. Then Bottle It In is just as soothing. It's the soothing balm that you need. I'd actually put it on a top 500 albums ever made list if somebody asked me to compile one. That's how
Right.
strongly I feel about it. Arturo, what say you about Bottle It In?
Well, first thing, Rolling with the Flow was not written by Kurt Vile. It's a cover of a song by Jerry Hayes.
Oh wow.
That's not a Kurt Vile song. It's a cover.
Okay.
It's the only song on the album that's a cover. He wrote all the other songs, but yeah, it's a
Okay.
cover. What I love about this album by the way, it was my number 2 album of 2018. My number 1 was Vince Staples' FM. What I love about this album is that this album really touches upon all the previous styles that he ventured in or delved into in his previous albums. For example, it has the folkish charm of Smoke Rings from My Halo from 2011. It
Right.
has the blown out psychedelia of Waking on a Pretty Days from 2013. And it has like, the Topanga Canyon, West Coast confessional singer-songwriter piano pop of Believe I'm Going Down from 2015. He
Yeah,
takes
and
all
he
of
mixes
those,
those all together and he comes up with a whole unique formula.
right, puts them all together, and what he does is he puts them together and blows them up, brings
Yep.
them all in, and then expands them, makes it more expansive. This record
Yep.
is really long too. It's like his longest album.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
it's 78 minutes. Yeah.
on vinyl, this would be a double album.
Yeah, and in the CD era, it would just about fill an entire CD.
Right. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's my take on this album. And yeah, I definitely think it's one of his very best. I like all his stuff. I
Yeah.
still think Smoke Ring for My Halo is the masterpiece. That would go on my list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. Is that
Yeah.
one? That's the Kurt Weill album I would put there. But this one's
Yeah.
pretty close. This one's pretty great in its own right.
Yeah,
And
this one,
yeah,
like
it's
you
awesome.
said, because it's a hybrid of the three that came before it, it's just
Yeah.
so strong
Yeah.
and so engaging. And again,
Right.
it really doesn't. I mean, it's a long album, but it doesn't ass out. Chris here again. Arturo and I have differing feelings about the subscription streaming service Spotify. While he likes to rail against the algorithmic component, I like the ability to find and then manage a personal catalog of music. The program is especially great for assembling playlists. Well, guess what? We've assembled a playlist to accompany this episode. The playlist features a healthy mix of all the music we describe and analyze during the episode. Think of it as a soundtrack to your curmudgeonly life. Find the link in this episode's description. And also become a member of our curmudgeonly community on Facebook if you haven't done so already. Let's now return to our regularly scheduled programming. So, why exactly are we shitting on Arcade Fire? Let me start the bidding. One generous way to describe the overall aesthetic of this Montreal band of twats is to call it maximal grandiosity. Fine. Maybe that's what it is, and maybe that's why it appealed to so many indie hipster douchebags circa 2005 to 2011. And maybe that tendency is why they did become a slightly better band over the course of 2 decades. But I say there's a way to do a maximal grandiosity and keep things just barely tasteful and even add in a dash of subtlety. Think Boston's self-titled debut album, which we covered last year on this podcast, or the best of 9 Inch Nails. Pretty maximally grand, right? But even those guys knew when to not overdo it. Not so with the Arcade Fire. If Arcade Fire had any of that restraint, they never, ever have showed it, and that was and is the problem. At some point, undistilled drama just becomes corny, overwrought, ridiculous, absurd, self-indulgent, self-righteous nonsense. There's a song on this band's Neon Bible, an album I hate, called Ocean of Noise. That, I think, would have been a better name for Arcade Fire. The noise never, ever stops. Never, ever, never, ever. Strings, horns, synths, vocal overdubs, fuzz and clanging from Lord knows where, and bandleader Win Butler wailing like a cantor on crack, or his wife whining away in her tiny baby voice on seemingly every single song. Every single damn song. It was all boundless and ran wilder than boars in heat locked in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. It was hideous then, and it remains hideous today. Also, you're dealing with a bunch of pretentious D-bags with a name like Arcade Fire. Not the Arcade Fire. The Arcade Fire actually sounds kind of cool. The Arcade Fire. Like that's a sense of humor, and maybe I want to hear them. But just
Right.
Arcade Fire, man. Arcade Fire. That sounds like a dumb, lazy pothead goofing around on a porch for strained laughs. Just yuck. I'd rather hear Nursing Home Fire, I think. That likely would be a metal band,
I'd rather hear "We Didn't Start the Fire" by Billy Joel.
Anyway, Arturo, what do you got?
Yeah, well, I mean, what you just said complimented the fire and brimstone that I put into this episode's parameter setter in the beginning of this episode. You've all heard it. Basically, yeah, they're puerile, overly theatrical, overly sentimental histrionics, and melodramatic, insincere faux indie bullshit. I
Yeah.
mean, you two could pull it off because like there was a time when you two were actually good,
Yep.
and they actually wrote some good songs and great
Remember, we
songs.
actually have an episode in our canon called "Remember when they, when you two did not suck."
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we cannot say this about Arcade Fire. So, before we completely take apart their awful discography, let's go into their origin story. Okay, and we'll go very briefly into it. All right, before we get into the albums. The foundation of what would become Arcade Fire started in Montreal in 2001 when high school buddies Win Butler and Josh Dew were attending McGill University and Concordia University, respectively. They were soon joined by music student Regine Chasson, who soon developed a romantic relationship with Butler and eventually married him in 2003, the couple eventually becoming the artistic core of the band. The band filled out as a 7-piece band with various multi-instrumentalists. If the makeup of the band wasn't indication enough of their ambition, it was made clear when they recorded a live Christmas album called A Very Arcade Christmas. Actually, Xmas is how they wrote it, and distributed it among their friends. Various lineup changes occurred throughout 2002 and '03, with Butler and Chasson remaining the constant core members, culminating in the release of the band's self-titled and self-released EP in the summer of '03. The EP generated word-of-mouth buzz in the Canadian music industry, and that buzz eventually helped the band land a record deal with an American label, North Carolina-based indie label Merge Records, which in the past had released renowned albums by Neutral Milk Hotel, The Magnetic Fields, and Spoon. Arcade Fire would go on to make Merge Records a lot of money, as by far their most commercially successful act. But before we go into the albums, what say you, Chris, about Arcade Fire's origin story?
Eh, Whatever. Art school, smart school. One thing to note is that Win Butler and his brother Will, who was a member of the band, they actually are originally from my area.
Oh,
I live in the southern suburbs of the Houston area. They grew up in the northern suburbs, a town called the Woodlands, which is about 50
oh, really?
miles from me. So that they're a couple of Texas boys, and they
Mm,
wound up in
Canada.
Canada, I think, as teens and stuck
Yeah.
around. So
Hmm.
so they're not actually Canadian, eh?
No. Well,
So
Butler isn't.
yeah, well, yeah. Regine Chazan is for
Yeah.
sure. She's actually the product of a couple of Haitian immigrants.
Mm,
So yeah, it's just they were a 7-piece to begin with. I
yeah.
mean, that's just a bad sign. You know, they didn't grow into a 7-piece band. They started as a 7-piece band.
Well,
Uh,
didn't Leonard Skinner start out as a 7-piece band too?
yeah, but come on, that was Leonard Skinner. This is Arcade Fire. Yeah, I was gonna say they were allowed to because they had 3 guitars and stuff, man. Uh, this band had like hurdy-gurdies and like accordions and violins and shit. You know.
All right, so let's get into these albums. All right, the first one, the debut, Funeral, the from 2004, which is now considered a classic album. I don't know why. But anyway, as I mentioned earlier in this episode's intro segment, the critical reception and reaction to the record, this album, Funeral, when it came out, was that of overwhelming praise and instant classic status. What that praise didn't prepare us listeners for was Win Butler's annoying, whiny treble of a voice, nor the overwrought, pretentious lyrics. Neighborhood Number One and Neighborhood Number Two, the pair of tracks that open the album, don't help matters with their uninspired, monotonous, generic indie rock. Yes, generic even back in 2004, and absolutely unappealing and frankly awkward melodies. Wake Up and Rebellion, Lies in parentheses, are the two most famous tracks on the album. The former aspires to emotional anthemic rock proportions with its full vocal choir chorus, but falls flat due to its cringeworthy bridge, Butler's obtuse to the point of inane lyrics and cheesy as hell gospel outro. The latter aspires to this us against the world, we're one big family, epic proportions, but comes across as melodramatic, especially with its cornball backing vocals and Butler's histrionic vocal delivery and childish lyrics. The rest of the album doesn't fare better. On my list of the most overrated albums ever made, this might be in the top 10. Chris?
Yeah, it's certainly up there, and I guess we missed a spot when we did our overrated albums of all time list a
Yeah.
couple years back.
That's how little we think of the Arcade Fire.
Yeah,
We didn't even think of putting them on there.
yeah, it barely registered. I mean, they're so overrated they don't even register with us. Wow. Yeah. So okay, where to start with this record? Well, first off, here's something to mention. Yeah, they were the it band of 2004, 2005, 2006, for the Brooklyn intelligentsia set and sort of the American and sort of basically North American indie rock scene. They were it, and they had this huge critical orgasm fest that happened with where everybody like loved this record. Just because it sounds different doesn't mean it's good. And
exactly.
It's
I've always said that. Yes,
it certainly
different
sounds.
isn't always good. Sometimes,
Yeah.
listen, experiments fail. Experiments can succeed. They don't always work.
It is a fair statement to say it's a singular record. It's a singularly cacophonous record for sure. Here's the thing. So in 2012, when Rolling Stone updated its list of the top 500 albums of all time, this album came in at number 151. And this is 8 years or about almost 8 years after its release. And so it still had this enthusiasm, especially among the white guy critic set. By 2020, when they updated the list, Funeral had fallen all the way down to number 500.
Yep.
Yep. So it almost dropped off of the list in one cycle. And so talk about diminishing historical returns. There you go. But not only that, but when you diversify the makeup of the voting populace, bands like this one tend to, the whitest band on earth tends to almost disappear. Now, granted, it still finished higher than Bob Dylan's Desire, which completely fell off the list. But go figure on that one. Anyway, about Funeral, one great song. I actually do like Wake Up. I think that is a great song. I think that it's bombastic. It's histrionic. It's over the top, and it's grand. And I really like it. There's 3 okay songs. Basically the end of the record: Haiti, Rebellion Lies, and In the Back Seat. 2 of those are written and sung by Regine Chazan, who's she's pretty insufferable too, but at least she's better than when Butler. The rest of the album, beyond awful. It's so precious. It's so precious. It cracks to dust at its worst borders on a parody of a U2 cover band, not of U2, of a U2 cover band, which is just brutal. I mean, this is a band that was utterly incapable of subtlety, as I hinted in my earlier comments. I mean, and the lyrics are just pure high school bullshit.
Butler's a horrible lyricist.
Let's just put it this way. Yeah, Win Butler was not a sage or an oracle to anyone except the demons in the corners of his own mind. Check out these lines from Neighborhood Number 3, in parentheses, Power Out. ISIS covered up my parents' eyes. Don't know how to see, don't know how to cry. Growing up in some strange storm, nobody's cold, nobody's warm. I went out into the night. I went out to find some light. Kids are dying out in the snow. Look at them go. Look at them go. And the power's out in the heart of man. Take it from your heart. Put it in your hand.
Dude, this is serious, like high school diary journal bullshit lyrics.
Junior high school. I mean, come on. I mean, when I was 12 years old, I think I was capable of better stuff than that. And then, like I said, my other issue with them is they just do too much. Like if they had learned, if they had any sense of economy, it might have been more tolerable. Because, like I said, the end of the record's not bad, but up until then. Oh gosh, I mean, you've got a song, Neighborhood Number 4. This another annoying tendency with this band is they have this thing about like having song titles like this one, this two, this three, this four, and
Yeah.
they do that throughout their catalog. It's pretty annoying. But the parenthetical on neighborhood number four is seven kettles.
Mm.
And here are some among the instruments that I counted as I listened to this piece of crap. The hurdy-gurdy, which is a really weird string instrument that kind of sounds like bagpipes. Accordion, acoustic guitar, chimes, violins, a full string section on the chorus, and something that strangely sounds like the boiling sound from a tea kettle as the first chorus ends. I mean, it's just brutal. But alas, here's what Rolling Stone tells us in their 500 greatest albums list right up in 2020. Loss, love, forced coming of age, and fragile generational hope. Arcade Fire's debut touched on all of these themes as it defined the independent rock of the 2000s. Built on family ties, leader Win Butler, his wife Regine Chazan, his brother Will, the Montreal band made symphonic rock that truly rocked, simultaneously outsized and deeply personal, like the best pop. But for all its sad realism, Butler's music still finds solace and purpose in communal celebration. For what it's worth, symphonic rock is like the dumbest, like the worst descriptor for this music because
Yeah.
the Moody Blues is symphonic rock.
Right.
This stuff is just horseshit.
Yeah. And it's not that symphonic either.
It's not
really
that
is.
symphonic. Yeah, I don't know where they got symphonic rock from. Uh,
Yeah.
but by the way, for what it's worth, before we go on, if you want to check out a band of similar ilk and similar drama, but who did it much, much, much better, do you remember a band called the Deers? Art?
Barely, barely. I
Yeah.
probably didn't like them that much if I barely
Yeah, I
remember.
was gonna say they were okay. I mean, they traded in this kind of theatrical drama, but they did it in a much more low key, much more tolerable, and much more tuneful way
Right.
than these turd burgers did.
All right. Their next album, their follow-up, Neon Bible from 2007. Sometime in the mid-noughties or the aughts, Bruce Springsteen became an indie rock touchstone for reference and influence. We discussed this with The Killers in our Why the Killers Are Shit episode of this series a while back, where Brandon Flowers took the earnest cinematic drama of Springsteen's music and crafted a tawdry, melodramatic, cheesy, plastic version of it. Well, Arcade Fire became no strangers to this disturbing trend with their second album. With the lead single, Keep the Cars Running, you get a candy ass, watered down, obnoxiously indie facsimile of anything Springsteen might have done in the 1980s. Intervention is more phony Springsteen, but with organs. Ooh. Win Butler's lyrics of anti-capitalist disillusionment and societal decay would resonate more if his quivering shrill of a voice wasn't so damn weak. At least Bono learned to balance his self-righteousness with irony and humor at some point. And of course, No Cars Go wastes some pretty good drum work with some rah-rah cheerleading backing vocals and some truly awful pompous art rock drudgery. I remember how popular this album was with the indie hipster crowd, and I
Oh
still
yeah,
think it fucking sucks. Chris?
yeah. This is their worst record, Tuneless Turd Burger. Uh, you mentioned Intervention. Yeah, gee, isn't it just so smart of them to use a pipe organ on a song about how bad it is to work for a church? Yeah. Gee,
Ooh, so clever.
ain't got much use for subtlety there, do you? And
Yeah.
then they you were dead on about Springsteen. So there's a song on there called Antichrist Television Blues,
Yeah.
which is a half-baked Born in the USA era Springsteen retread. They're clearly mining for the territory that Bruce mined on songs like Bobby Jean and No Surrender. Here's the difference. Those songs had hooks. Now, this song supposedly is a rant about Joe Simpson. Remember him? He was the glory-seeking father of Jessica and Ashley Simpson back in
Oh.
the day. But the best I can figure, at least Joe Simpson knew he was an insufferable ass, unlike Butler and his bandmates.
Yeah.
Now, this album, is disturbing proof that albums like this that just proved that layers upon layers of noise could pass for art in the eyes of critics back in the mid
Yeah.
aughts.
Yeah.
You know who stood out among these art the people that Arcade Fire fooled, don't you, Arturo?
Let me guess. It's our favorite music critic.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert Christgau. He fell for the Arcade Fire thing, hook, line, and sinker. Bob. Okay, so here's what Christgau had to say about Neon Bible. Quote, to remind us that anxiety is in his bones, when Butler refurbishes the 2003 plaint No Cars Go as a football cheer about the safe place just before sleep. But everywhere else, he emerges from his precious privacy and names the things he has to be afraid of, things he shares with all of us. Religions run muck, rising tides, the surveillance state, a cowboy in chief with so little to lose he could start World War III on a dare. He doesn't tame his fears by naming them or hint that they can be overcome, although in, quote, the well in the lighthouse, he advises the lighthouse, if you leave, them ships are going to wreck. But he and his large band of unarty art rockers rock so hard and so beautiful they can propel anyone who listens past the end of the record. They thud rather than thunder, but what a loud and joyous thud it is. A plus.
The only
I don't agree with any word that he said on there except thud.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, he was right about thud.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I don't get it.
On this episode, we took a good old-fashioned curmudgeonly dump on the awful music of Arcade Fire. For the next episode, we're going the opposite direction and actually praising a band. This one an early 2000s/noughties contemporary of Arcade Fire that got even bigger as the 2010s started. When the Black Keys emerged in 2002 as a blues rock, garage rock duo, they were unfairly compared to the White Stripes. In fact, their brand of garage rock was noticeably devoid of any real punk rock influence and was instead deeply indebted to the Mississippi Delta blues of greats such as Junior Kimbrough, Hound Dog Taylor, Jesse May Hemphill, and Fred McDowell. Over time, their sound would encompass R&B, soul, funk, psychedelia, glam rock, and even tinges of hip-hop, eventually blowing up to huge commercial success by the time the 2010s began. In a time when rock music receded in the public consciousness as a secondary niche genre, the Black Keys were arguably the last great mainstream American rock band. In the wake of their recently released and quite good new album, join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you why the Black Keys are great. The indulgence would continue with their next album, The Suburbs from 2010. This album marks the peak of Arcade Fire's supposed imperial phase, as well as the peak of their commercial and critical success, even winning a Grammy Award for Album of the Year. After this album, Arcade Fire albums would still chart in the top 10 around the world and in several countries at number 1. But that's mostly due to the fact that they're a big name band with a sizable hardcore fan base. Kind of like how Kanye West, who hasn't had a genuine hit single or album in over a decade, still has his albums peak at number 1 in charts worldwide before sinking like a rock after a week.
Yeah. Even a black Nazi has fans.
Right. As for the music itself, it's about as crappy as anything else Arcade Fire has done. Lyrically, it's a thematic song cycle, stopping just short of being a concept album about the empty lives of working and middle-class people living in the suburbs of North American society. Considering that Win Butler comes from a wealthy family, it comes across as more than a little condescending and insulting, as well as full of the pretentious indie hipster posturing and self-righteousness that the band is known for. The title track starts off innocently enough as a jaunty Britpop number, a la the Kinks, but then again, there are those irritating lyrics and Butler's shrill voice augmented by a shitty chorus. Month of May actually kind of sort of rocks and makes you want to forget that you're listening to Arcade Fire. But then there are songs like We Used to Wait, which annoyingly drive the annoying lyrical point home with the kind of listless, synthesizer-driven indie pop that started to saturate rock music starting in the 2010s. Ready to Start is as cheesy in its synthesizer hooks and devoid of any memorable verse and chorus as modern indie rock gets, while Sprawl 2, Mountains Beyond Mountains, in parentheses, a showcase for Regine Sachon's absolutely awful lead vocals, is cringe-inducing 1980s synth pop meets unoriginal and uninspiring art rock. The album is a piece of shit and one of the worst records to ever win the best album Grammy, which is saying something.
Which is saying something, yeah.
The Grammy Awards checkered history.
Yeah, I was going to say winning the Grammy for Album of the Year is kind of like the reward for mediocrity. I mean, come on. This fucking album won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 2011. Hey, at least the Grammys had indie cred. Here's something funny for you. So there's an article from Spin that ran in 2010 when this album was coming out. And let me quote from this. The article reads, "What will it sound like?" Talking about the album. "Well, according to frontman Win Butler, like, quote, a mix of the Depeche Mode and Neil Young." Wait, what? Quote, "That's kind of a weird combo. And if it doesn't sound weird, then I think it's a success," Butler told the BBC. Let me name two artists that this album sounds nothing like. Depeche Mode and Neil Young.
Sounds nothing. I mean, there is synth pop, but it's really bad synth pop, and it sounds nothing. It sounds nothing like the dark synth pop of Depeche Mode.
Yeah, it's basically like wannabe new wave. It's like wannabe generic new wave. It's not even Depeche Mode in the sense that maybe there's maybe electric keys, but that's about it. And but that's just awful. And look, they clearly made this album to get songs on the radio and to get into actually maybe make some hits, because in my rock station that I listened to in White Plains, New York, when I lived there, which was actually a great station, they would play these sort of more adult contemporary alt rock type of artists.
Right. And
so 3 songs actually made their airwaves. And those were the remarkably dopey Ready to Start, the dull as all hell Modern Man, and the so dramatic it's cheesy We Used to Wait. I will say this: I think it's a better record than the first two, which of course ain't saying much. I mean,
damning with faint praise.
Yeah, no shit. A smaller piece of excrement is still excrement, right? This album, again, it suffers from wannabe new wave and wannabe U2 syndromes. The energy is off the charts, and things are actually a little bit leaner, just a little bit though. The problem is, again, wannabes just wannabe. There's a discernible hook or two, but they're all just like so and blah. There's bad impressions of Morrissey and Bono, and that just gets amusing after a while. And I agree with you. The best song of the album is Month of May. Why? Because it's a straight guitar rocker. It's just a chugging little throwaway of a punk song with a cool driving riff borrowed from the Wires of yesteryear. But again, that's just a minor throwaway. No frills and no purpose. The rest of the album is going for a serious statement, which is what makes it a joke. The end.
Speaking of jokes, the next album by Arcade Fire is their double album, Reflektor, from 2013, Reflektor with a K, not a C, with LCD Sound System's James Murphy co-producing this double album alongside Marcus Draves and the band itself. You would think this would be Arcade Fire's dive into indie dance music, but more importantly than that, hopefully a deep dive into quality music for a change. Well, you would definitely be wrong on the latter. If danceable indie pop mixed with traditional folk dance from Haiti, known as rara, sounds like something interesting and even exotic, leave it to shitty bands like Arcade Fire to screw it up. Murphy's sonic fingerprints are certainly all over the title track and lead single, too. Too bad his songwriting skills and talent for minimalist arrangements aren't, as the track meanders along with a listless groove and corny interjections of synthesizer washes and horn stabs. Only indie hipster douchebag white people can dance to this shit, I swear to God.
Pretty much.
Afterlife has, yeah, they can dance to this shit while drinking their craft beer. Afterlife has a better groove as far as indie dance pop goes, but isn't compelling as a song in any way at all, with not a single memorable verse, chorus, or hook. We Exist continues the indie dance pop vibe with no catchy hooks or songwriting. Does it sound like I'm being monotonous? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what this album is for 2 albums.
Yeah. For 85 minutes over two
I know.
records.
This album was critically acclaimed at the time of its release, but its standing has precipitously dropped in the 11 years since. Pitchfork recognized it as one of the best albums of the decade so far in 2014, but then Pitchfork completely left it off their list of the 200 best
Yeah.
albums of the 2010s.
Yeah, I remember
Doesn't say
yeah, they
doesn't
scored it
say
at
much.
9.2. They
Right.
scored it at 9.2 at the time when they first released.
I
So
know. It doesn't say much for Pitchfork's tastemakers of 2013, does it?
nope, it does not. No, it does not. I will say this album is living proof that James Murphy can make anything at least tolerable on first listen. Hey,
Yeah.
man, it's disco arcade fire. And that probably with Murphy adding, some lean electric drum stuff in there, it probably does stand as the band's best record, which
Yeah.
again says very little in the shit scheme of shit things.
Yeah.
I will say I think the title track and Porno and Afterlife at least reach the level of guilty dance rock pleasure,
Right.
but the rest just continues their wannabe new wave disease carried over from the suburbs. They
Yeah.
actually rip off the spirit of Blondie's Heart of Glass and those style of vibes on the song Joan of Arc. And they even go island music. And again,
Yeah.
that hybrid of Haitian music and reggae that you talked
Yeah.
about, it's like,
Yeah.
what is this? I mean, is this the Specials? Is this the Clash? Nope, just a joke. But
Yeah.
by this point, the gushing critical cult that adored this band so much was crashing into their own rocks. Get a load of this horse shit. And this is the beginning of Pitchfork's review of this album, Reflektor, which again, I think was scored a 9.2. And this is from writer Lindsay Zoladz. Quote, it's likely that the first time you heard the Arcade Fire's monstrously anticipated fourth album, Reflektor, you were, to borrow a phrase that Win Butler spits out like the bite of bad food during the record's disco noir title track, staring at a screen. This past Thursday, the band posted to YouTube an 85-minute video which queued up the entirety of the double album to visual from Marcel Camus's kaleidoscopic 1959 film Black Orpheus. If something that happens on the internet can be considered an event in capital letters, then this certainly was one. In the same moment I saw the band's official tweet announcing it, two people simultaneously instant messaged me the link. It was late afternoon on the East Coast, lunchtime on the West, and in that moment I did exactly what thousands of other people in those and all other time zones did, stopped what I was doing, closed some extraneous tabs and programs, and listened. The auto-updating comments became a chronicle of knee-jerk first impressions, fervent gushing. Well, the bass line on Joan of Arc is fucking epic. Groan-worthy puns. Quote, I can't even reflect how excited this makes me. And egregious misspelling. I don't understand what all the fuzz is about. In quotes. This scene would have seemed bizarre and likely a little sad to us decades ago, and it's frightening to imagine how quaint it will seem in the future. But this is how a lot of people at this moment in time, the one in which Reflektor was made and the one it distrustfully interrogates, discover new music. Alone, together. End quote. Bah.
And she gave it a good review, right?
Yeah, she did.
What's her name again? Lindsay?
Lindsay Zoladz.
Okay, so just something to remember. Never ever listen to an album that Lindsay Zoladz recommends.
Probably not. And
It's the same how I feel about a Mojo's Victoria Segal, a very talented, good writer with the worst taste in music imaginable.
Gotcha. But I'm sure she's a nice person.
Well, I'm sure she is.
and I'm sure this Lindsay Zoladz, I'm sure that she likes the insufferable drone of Supersymmetry too, the 11-minute shit shower album closer.
Yeah,
you got to believe. So, but hey, nowhere to go but downhill from here, right?
Oh boy, and the critics start abandoning them too. 2017, Everything Now, their next album. When this album came out, it proved rather polarizing with a lot of critics, with the negative half claiming the album was an underwhelming and uninspired rehash of the previous album. Well, for the first time, the critics were right about this band. The insufferable sounds of cheesy French cabaret pop packaged in the band's now patented indie dance pop synth pop style pollute the title track and lead single. Creature Comfort, while having an admirable lyric admonishing the shallowness and vanity of celebrity-obsessed society, is ruined by its glossy, generic indie pop production and Regine Chasson's obnoxiously grating vocals. Signs of Life is as embarrassingly 80s as bad retro 80s synth pop gets, while Electric Blue sounds like Talking Heads offshoot the Tom Tom Club, but with an utter cluelessness as to what a catchy pop song is, and with Chasson singing in an equally clueless falsetto. What an utter shower of shit. Chris?
Yeah, notice how we like to say shower of shit here on this episode. This band inspires such language. It's worth mentioning that this album was co-produced by Thomas Bonghalter of Daft Punk. So you definitely know what they were going for, and it kind of speaks to the desperation for continued relevance by bringing Bonghalter in. At this point, they're not even hiding their pretentious DNA. I mean, they start the record with Everything Now continued, leading into the actual song Everything Now. That's just fucking lame. And it's actually kind of pitiful how reverential of European dance rock this album is. Signs of Life, which you mentioned, it sounds like a burlesque version of Pet Shop Boys' West End Girls. Jeez.
But here's the thing about the whole synth, cheesy, the 80s synth pop and the indie EDM. They've been doing this for 2.5 albums now. Half of the Suburbs is that. Reflektor is all that. Everything Now is like, how much more synth pop is this band gonna do?
I know. So that's what I'm saying. Even the critics were really starting to catch on to how phony this suddenly ironic dancey crap was. This is from Drowned in Sound, and the author here is Andrei Lukowski. Everything Now seems to carry faint echoes of Neon Bible's disaffection, but instead of channeling it via brooding big rock bombast, they've gone virtually the opposite way. The album's best, most problematic, and probably most representative track is undoubtedly the single Creature Comfort, over a gorgeously pulsing synth line reminiscent of the brief era when New Order and The Cure were rivals. Wynn and Regime delivered their most intense vocal performance on the record. The standout lyric is, quote, "God make me famous if you can't just make it painless." A great nihilistic line, but delve into the verses and there's some properly troubling stuff. Quote, "She dreams about dying all the time. She told me she has come so close, filled up the bathtub and put on our first record." Quote, "I mean, seriously, WTF is this? Who are these people?" The meaning of the line rather hinges on whether this really happened or not, but putting a self-referential quiff about funeral on a song about suicide is not the band we once knew. But hey, you got to give the band credit for scoring the movie Her, which is a great film. That same year, they got nominated for an Oscar. Actually, it was Will Butler and one of the other guys got nominated for an Oscar for doing
probably the best thing Win Butler has ever done.
It wasn't Win Butler; it was Will Butler.
Oh, Will, his brother. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well,
yeah. And
there you go.
And another guy from the band that did the score. And if you haven't seen that album, if you haven't seen that film, folks, Her, check it out. It's more relevant than ever. It's more relevant than ever now. It's basically a guy falling in love with Alexa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's pretty scary. Go ahead.
Their next album and their last album from from the year 2022. The last album Arcade Fire did as of this podcast's episode's recording was conceived of and mostly recorded during the COVID-19 lockdown of 2021. And it makes you wish the band would have stepped outside so they could have caught the virus and died.
Oh, stop.
Yes, I know that's quite harsh, but this album is an absolute atrocity. They're still doing their wretched indie dance pop retro 80s synth pop mesh, but now augmented with folk rock that turns from gentle one minute to overwrought and stupidly bombastic the next. harking back a little to their first album. End of the Empire 1 through 3 tries to comment on the decline of America as an economic and cultural force, but ends up sounding like an awful melodramatic Broadway show tune. The
Yep.
Lightning 1, comma 2 is overly sentimental slop with even sloppier lyrics about making it together and don't quit on me and I won't quit on you. And then halfway through, it breaks into a very Springsteen-esque rocker, a la their Neon Bible album from 2007. But, Springsteen done by a bunch of tone-deaf, mentally disabled numbnuts. Unconditional One, in parentheses, look out, kid, is that rarity of rarities, an actually pretty good Arcade Fire song, this being an engaging little folk pop number. But songs like this are few and far between on this album, much less their entire awful discography. Chris?
Yeah, they're on creative fumes when they bring out the multi-part name gimmick several times in the course of
Yeah,
one album. Age of
right.
Anxiety 1 and 2, The Lightning 1 and 2, Unconditional 1 and 2, and hey, like you said, we even get End of the Empire 1, 2, 3, and 4. That alone made me not want to listen to the record, but at least it's better and more honest than everything now.
Yeah,
By now they're actually an honest to goodness electronica band. I mean, let's face it, they're
yeah.
they've gone fully electronic. Actually, the album was co-produced by Nigel Godrich. Oh,
Mm.
shame on you, Nigel. You'll always have Kid A, and you'll always have OK Computer, and you'll always have a
And
couple of,
Beck.
and you have a couple
And
of Beck records.
yeah.
But yeah, but otherwise, poor Nigel. Anyway, I'll give them credit for evolving, even if the end result remains mostly insufferable. But hey, at least they matured and found their way out of the string and horn and hurdy-gurdy hellscape. But we still have the ridiculously tortured vocals of Win Butler. End of the Empire is unbelievably awful. I mean,
Mm.
it's supposed to be a ballad of defeat to social media and internet junk culture, but like you said, is really just Win thinking that he's David Bowie. Maybe he's
Mm.
more like Tool, as in a Tool. And the actual refrain of this song is "I unsubscribe" or "We unsubscribe." Yeah, as if this is like the most profound thing that we as this culture can do. If we unsubscribe, we can get our freedom back. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, shut the fuck up. And one of the ironic things is that they kind of snap back with the critics. And a really great piece from a really good critic named Carl Wilson. No, not that Carl Wilson. He's a guy who's been around for a long time. He's written for Spin and a bunch of other places. He wrote something for Slate and kind of doing an overview, kind of a meta oversight of the way the reviews were going for this record. And this is actually pretty funny, or this is fun. So, quoting from Carl Wilson's Slate article from 22, quote, the band, they were the target of a mini rerun of anti-disco backlash from listeners who thought they'd squandered what made them special. And this is talking about everything now.
Yeah.
But had they stuck to the tried and true, they would have been kicked around for repeating themselves.
Mm.
Spin lamented that Arcade Fire once promised to, quote, be the natural successors to U2, while Pop Matters mourned that they had actually become U2. Taking a step back, the moment was also the nadir of popular appetite for the whole concept of a rock band, which could not have seemed more outdated. What did the world want from Arcade Fire? It wanted them to go away. And for the next 5 years, they mostly did. In comparison, in 2022, Arcade Fire can hardly seem to lose. Rock no longer seems like a dinosaur that refuses to die off, but a welcome throwback to bygone days. Witness the glowing response to the neo-post-punk charms of the young UK band Wet Leg, for example. Nostalgia for the early 2000s is well underway. Arcade Fire has regrouped, and the band's central couple spent the pandemic writing reams of new material at their New Orleans base, then reunited with their geographically dispersed comrades to record last year with Nigel Godrich, best known for his work with Radiohead and among others. And We is being greeted with fanfares as a comeback. In reviews, the New Yorker declared that, quote, the band returns to its exhilarating anthems. A New York Times headline says Arcade Fire has, quote, found a way back. Pitchfork reports that the album reclaims the band's trademark marks after a decade spent fighting against them. and Stereogum leads off its premature evaluation with the single line paragraph, "Now this is more like it." My question is exactly what that it is, end quote.
So he's kind of panning the record.
Yeah, in a way, or he's panning the fawners. He's just kind of
Yeah.
making the point that there's this weird critical snapback. If you follow him, it's like everybody's given up on him, and now all of a sudden they're the critics are in the wrong again, and it's like, eesh, yeah,
Well, here's the thing though, like Reflektor got glowing reviews when it came out, and
yeah,
then it kind of the album disappeared. No one talks about it anymore, and everything now got panned. And we got, let's face it got mixed reviews when it came
yeah,
out. Some people
yeah.
like
It
it,
was
some
in the
people
'60s in Metacritic.
yeah.
Yeah.
So their last three albums have not been that successful. You
No,
know?
not at all. And but yet they still stand. Will Butler is no longer a part of the band, so I think that they now stand as five full-time members and a bunch of touring members. And
Right.
yeah, they don't have any full-time violinists or accordionists or anything like that. But the married couple is still there, and a couple of guys who've
Yeah.
been there since '03 are still there. So somehow
Right.
they're still kicking. So let's end this episode, and I'll just set you up for an easy punchline, Arturo.
Yeah.
What is the legacy of Arcade Fire?
Well, I alluded to this in this episode's parameter setter at the beginning. There is a three-headed monster of god-awful 2000s rock or noughties rock. The three-headed monster, it consists of The Killers, My Chemical Romance, and Arcade Fire. Okay, what's Arcade Fire's legacy? Of those three bands, they're the least awful, but they're still pretty fucking awful.
I actually disagree with that. I would actually put the Killers slightly behind, or I would put slightly behind Arcade Fire. I don't know. My Chemical. I don't know, man. That's like a fight to the death. Is who's the worst of those three bands? Remember, remember those are two of the other volleys in our shit series.
Yeah. So yeah, the three-headed monster of terrible 2000s rock are those three bands. And their
Yeah.
legacy is that they're the least bad of those three. But they're still all awful.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, hey, they're the least bad of the worst. All right, what an accomplishment. The curmudgeons deem you the least bad.
No, in all seriousness, no, they're the indie rock band that blew up indie rock to arena rock proportions with their pompous, pretentious, melodramatic bullshit music. Okay. And now they're not that popular anymore. Younger
Yeah,
generations of music fans, they're a strictly millennial band. Like Gen Z people don't follow Arcade Fire. And I
no,
doubt the next generation will. They've kind of fallen off, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So,
and as we saw from them going from 151 to 500, guaranteed they ain't making the next list whenever they
yeah, I
update
know.
that.
No, I know.
No.
And yeah, they really, I mean, that's their thing. They were one of the biggest bands from 2004 to like 2010, 2011. And then I think people caught on to how phony this band was. They just caught
Yeah.
on to,
Yeah. I was gonna say when you get caught red-handed, sometimes then things go the way of the dodo bird, and I think that that's probably what's going to happen to Arcade Fire.
Right.
Thank God. So, on that glorious note, folks, as we do at the end of these episodes, we encourage you to join our curmudgeonly community on Facebook, which, like I said, it's been raucous at times up there. It'll become more raucous here in the days to come. It's invite only, but chances are we'll let you in. You can join us there at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. If you are a huge Arcade Fire and you are very, very mad at us for shitting on your favorite band, you can let us know exactly how you feel. Drop us a line at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And because this podcast is dedicated to public service, I will go ahead and I will post a link to a Spotify playlist featuring the best of the worst of Arcade Fire.
Oh God, I am definitely staying away from that.
Yeah, it's we want everybody to marvel. If we're saying this band is shit, we need to have what should Exhibit A be? The shit. So we're gonna have that Spotify playlist, and that'll be in the show notes, the description wherever you're picking up this podcast, go check the description. There's a link within the notes to access the Spotify playlist. Enjoy at your peril.